This is the Superpowered Mind podcast for inquiring individuals who are tired of the struggle for peace, happiness, and clarity. I'm Claire Diamond, ready to help you explore the principles of the mind, the self, and reality to unlock ultimate mental freedom. This podcast is the one to listen to if you're ready to experience the capabilities of the superpowered mind. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 29. This week, we're looking at boundaries and what are healthy boundaries, and how can a conversation about identity, self, reality, what other people really are, really have an enormous effect on the sanity, really, of our boundaries. So, first of all, it seems to me that there is a danger in this conversation that the confrontation involved in maintaining healthy boundaries, in establishing really deeply healthy, loving, supportive, respectful relationships, there's a danger in this conversation that inclination gets bypassed because the confrontation involved in setting healthy boundaries can be too much. So if we've been brought up and we're really scared, we've been punished or abused, or there's been violence whenever we've said what we wanted, or when we've said no to someone, or when we've said our preferences, we've been laughed at or shamed. It can be really hard to find our voice and to really, speak from a very healthy respect for our own space, our own body and mind. And the danger of this conversation is that it gives a spiritual reason, some nice spiritual words that legitimize that tendency to avoid speaking up. It actually can silence our voice because, this conversation is really about there's no objective self and other. There's no independent, objective reality. And so that can be harnessed to say, oh, well, there's no me, there's no other people. It's all fine. It's just, it's just love. It's just how it is. But that's really harmful and really unhealthy. And it's not the truth of this conversation, because this conversation, done truthfully, done with rigor and with courage, often because it really does involve us moving into areas of confrontation and discomfort to really see what's true. When that's happening, this conversation unlocks a voice and it creates a means of expression that is so true and authentic, and in which all the old protections and defenses and fear, shame, need, and insecurity are understood and are welcomed, really, as part of the wholeness of this experience of being. And in that process, there's an integration happening that means that they lose their power. So that young child or teenager that learned that it was safer to not have boundaries, learned that it was safer to have hyper boundaries, that meant in every situation we were withdrawing and hiding away. That child, that conditioning really no longer runs the show. And I think it's such an important, it's the essence of this conversation, that process of integration, which means what runs the show now is a mind and an attention that is continually moving deeper into reality, and which is coming more and more from that space of knowing of what we are, of the truth of what we are, of that enormity, the infinite, absolute rock solid nature of what we are. So that's the first thing to say. So how does it happen? How does it happen that this conversation is a enabler of very strong, healthy boundaries? Well, we need to almost operate in this conversation now on two different levels. First of all, there's this level of bodies. There's a world of form, people, 7 billion people, animals, plants, situations, circumstances. And each of these bodies is governed, all the behavior, the attitude, the reactions, the responses, the hopes, the fears, all of it governed by a subconscious conditioning. And so if we think, each body has its own program, and some of those programs are really harmful to other people. And we all know that, don't we? We've all seen examples where someone's behavior, someone's anger, their reactions, their emotional outbursts, their way of reacting is creates real harm to the people around them. And so boundaries are a way of changing other people's behavior. It's only through our own ability to say no to something, and to say no continually, and to mean that no, that something that someone has been trying to do to us or with us can end, really. And we can take that no to the very highest levels. We can take them to court if necessary. The conditionings of each body bumping up against each other are changing all the time, and they're changing because of each other's conditioning, influence happening all the time. So that's at the level of this apparent reality, and we can't deny that. To deny that's happening is to use this conversation as a way of avoidance, really. It becomes very dangerous. We give up our role of influence if we use this conversation to deny that. At the same time, for humans, there is a whole other thing going on. And let me read this quote from Deepak Chopra, which I absolutely love. "The real you is a field of intelligence in which the person you've identified yourself with, all other persons, as well as the environment in which they exist, all co-arise and co-evolve as a result of your own self-interactions." So the power of the human mind is such that it creates a me. It creates an identity. It says, this is what I am. And that identity can include the appearance, the body, the roles, the family, the sports team, the money earned, the job titles, whatever it is. And all other people that appear in the reality of that individual are also made of whatever it is that creates that self-identity. So the person you've identified yourself with and all other persons all co-arise and co-evolve as a result of your own self-interactions, which means your own ever fluctuating self-understanding. So there's an overlay for humans, which means that essentially the reality in which we're operating is a mirror reality. And the more intense the identification that there is with that individual self, ironically, the more focus there is on the individual me, I'm separate, I'm this, those others are that, they don't understand me, I'm the victim, I'm isolated. The more focus there is, the more selfing there is, to use the term of another teacher, the more that reality is also a function of that same belief system of separation. And so when it comes to boundaries, it's really interesting because from the point of view of a highly insecure, vulnerable, hyper-protective, hyper-vigilant, hyper-controlling, hyper-self-obsessed, really, mind, the boundaries that are being drawn are really within the mind. They're not between a real objective self and a real objective reality. They're like false boundaries between a concept of self and a concept of others, and a boundary is drawn between that. And so we see this, don't we? We see this in our everyday lives. When we are feeling most vulnerable, the power of other people to offend us or to make us feel worthless or ashamed, scared, is so much greater. And it's not because the threat is actually real, it's because the self-concept is responding to the mirror image of itself. When there is hypervigilance and when the boundaries are really being reinforced around the identity, when we're really prickly or highly vulnerable, any single glance or tone of voice that seems slightly off, it becomes a massive deal. When we're really sensitive, it's in these moments that the self is particularly vulnerable. The mind is particularly intensely identified. And it's not responding to reality in that moment. It's like a battle, a war that's going on within the mind itself. So we can see how this overlay of this sort of, and my book, The Game, is what this is really all about. If you like, it's a very short book. If you'd like to read it, it's one of my favorites. It's really exploring that concept, that overlay of the mind's version, like a sort of chess game mapped out over and actually obscuring actual reality. We're insane. The mind is insane in this intense identification. It's completely understandable because it's what's been learned. It's coming from wounds to the system, from fear and shame and need, insecurity that's been learned, and it's insane. So for healthy boundaries to start to emerge, we need both. We need that understanding of what the mind creates when there's hyper-selfing, when there's intense identification. And we need the recognition that even without that, there are harms that are created, and that our own conditioning plays a role in how those harms are dealt with. And so we can really see how from the need to be liked or to have attention or to gain approval, the boundaries that cut off harm might not kick in as readily as they would in a healthy relationship, say. And I see that in myself. And so the way that we can approach this, it seems to me, is that first of all, we recognize that every single interaction, every conversation, every situation involving other people and our needs and wants and what other people need and want, other people's behavior, our behavior, every single situation is an invitation for the mind to get very attentive and very still and to see what's actually going on here. And particularly when there is stress in that interaction. So when there is a stress, when there's tension, when there is a feeling of being attacked emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, energetically. Not talking really physically here, but particularly when there's this sort of feeling of identity threat. It's really interesting, I think, to not react immediately there. The tendency will be to fight it, to flee, to fawn, because that reaction, that stress reaction, is coming from our conditioning. And what's at stake here looks like it's our survival. So say work is a real place of identification, and our worth, our value, our sense of existence depends really heavily on how we are at work, how people relate to us at work. And someone in a meeting talks disrespectfully to us, the immediate reaction will be huge. If our survival, if our identity, if our sense of self depends on our reputation at work, our sense of how people perceive us, then being spoken to disrespectfully at work is enormous. The stress it creates will be enormous. And for some people, it's work. In other people, it's with a spouse or partner. In others, it might be with children. In others, it might be with our parents or our friends. Each of us have our different areas, and there might just be one person with whom this is going on. It might be everybody. But it's really interesting when there is that reaction, in us to fight or flight, and there's not any actual physical danger, but the whole danger is to the identity. Just hang out there and just see what's really at stake here. Because the boundaries that we would put in are boundaries within our own concepts of self and other. And they are not really sane in that moment of deep tension. They're not reliable. The tension isn't a reliable benchmark of actual danger. The tension is a indication of how much the identity believes itself to be at stake here. And so we can start to see these moments of confrontation are real gifts. They start to draw the attention into the body so that we can feel that stress. And at the same time, take the attention into the situation. What is actually being challenged here? What is under threat? What's at stake? And what's wanted? This is such a good question when it comes to boundaries. What's actually wanted? Because if what's wanted actually isn't achievable, I want them to respect me. I want them to think I'm great. I want them to think I'm an awesome boss. We can't control other people's thoughts. We can't control other people's opinions towards us. We can do the job really well, focus on attention moving into problems and solving problems. But when attention is revolving around this identity and me and how I'm perceived, how I perceive myself, how others perceive me, how under threat I am, then we really know that our boundaries are all over the place, really, and completely innocently and so understandably. So, yeah, all of life, every situation, every relationship, every conversation is a gift towards healthier and healthier boundaries that are more and more grounded in reality, a mind and attention that is going deeper and deeper into what's actually going on, and a body that is more and more available to feeling whatever emotional storm is going on. And through that process, the voice, our ability to say no or to say yes or to correct another person's behavior towards us, it becomes so sane and so grounded in non-separation, really grounded in wholeness, that boundaries become really effortless when before they might have been a source of so much angst and exhaustion. So yeah, it's really good to see. It's such an excellent area for us all to consider. Yeah, thank you. Lots of love. Bye. Thank you for listening to Superpowered Mind with me, Claire Diamond. If you want extra support in the exploration of your mind, download our exclusive subliminal recording, especially for podcast listeners, on bit.ly/podcast subliminal.